It's a sad show. It's a sad song, but I'm going to review it anyway. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am talking about a highly anticipated show that was on my to-do list, Hadestown. I was going to see this a couple years ago, but then the pandemic happened, so I had to delay it. But I finally got to see Hadestown. So this is my review of that show. I'm glad I was able to see it now. If you've been following me at all, you know that I'm a huge fan of the opera fan, and I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have this phantom-shaped hole in my heart. I wonder if I'll ever fill it. And then I remembered about Hadestown, and I was like, ooh, something about that show, even though I didn't really know a whole lot about it. I knew it was like a dark, moody, I knew it was a romantic kind of thing. And I did a quick little like I wanted like a one sentence description, and I found that. And then I didn't find anything else. I was like, I'm going to go in not knowing anything. If you don't know this show at all, it is currently playing on Broadway as of recording this review, and it's on tour, which is how I saw it. Uh, it's very different. So if you want a show that goes somewhere different, tries different genre mixing, you like sad romantic tales, I think this show's for you. I recommend it. It's not at all what I expected it to be based on the description that I did find out. So I just think I would say just go with an open mind. We all try, right? We try not to have a preconceived idea of what we're about to witness, but it's hard not to fabricate one. Like your brain just kind of does it. It's not a bad thing that it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. But it was a very big surprise. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Can't recommend it enough. And that's all I can say that's not spoilery. So, spoilers, people. We got to spoil this thing to really talk about it, because the only good reviews, I think, are the ones that dissect, because a lot of dissection needs to happen here. Okay, so if you're comfortable with spoilers moving forward, here we go. So what is Hadestown? Well, the one sentence description I discovered is it's a modern retelling of two Greek myth couples, Hades and Persephone, intertwined with the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. Now I know those Greek myths; they're well worn, well played. Greek mythology in general is everywhere. It's pretty ubiquitous. Even if you don't know you're looking at Greek mythology in all sorts of works of art, it's everywhere, in brand names, not just movies and television and animation and comic books and what have you. Like, the Greeks invented everything. Um, and I thought, ooh, that's interesting. So it makes sense that it was called Hadestown, because both those myths take place in what's the Greeks called the underworld. And I was like, okay, I like Greek mythology. That sounds like it's right up my alley. But that is another oversimplification. So there's a couple points I want to draw out, what's going on thematically with this show. It actually reminds me a lot of Come From Away, in that it's a small show, meaning it doesn't have a giant orchestra, it doesn't have a giant chorus, it's like a dozen people making this whole thing happen on stage town, I mean. And there's a band, and it's on stage, and there's a turntable. Man, these shows nowadays, they just love them some turntables. But it's not there just for its own sake. It makes sense why they have a turntable, and they use it sparingly. It's not, they don't spin everything just for spinning sake. And it mixes genres of music that you don't normally hear. Like the whole time I was listening to Come From Away, I was like, gosh, this is so Celtic, I think is the word. Same thing here. Now, I'm not a music person. I love musicals, but I'm all about the storytelling and the narrative and the visual aspects. I'm actually really bad at music. Like if you were to just play regular music that has nothing to do with theater, I'm so bad at saying, oh yeah, this is this and that is that. I'm actually terrible at that. And listening to the music of Hadestown is nothing like anything I've ever heard before, but it's music I'm not familiar with. So it's not your typical Broadway big belty numbers or long soliloquy type, you know, like you don't have your sidekick song and your big chorus song and your villain song and the young lovers falling in love with song and all that. Like it's just very different. So don't go into this thinking you're getting your same old musical or something that's more traditional. This is definitely genre mixing, which I think is one of the most compelling aspects. And so listening to it, I was like, what is this? This is I think this is the blues, maybe. So I did a little digging after the show, because I was like, okay, now that I've seen it, let me research. And the creator of this is a girl from Vermont. I love that this is written by a woman. I can't pronounce their names. I'm just gonna put them here. But so this is an American based show. And she claims as she was writing it that she thought as it, she didn't have this idea and it just came out. It actually took her over a decade to really, really fine tune it all the way to the current version we have now. And she initially described it as a folk opera. And I was like, oh, folk music. I am really not familiar with folk music at all. Like when you say folk music, nothing comes to mind. I can't name a single famous folk singer or a famous folk song. Like I'm just that stupid when it comes to um, genres. So I'm like, oh, this is folk music because how to describe what Hadestown is? It's a mixture of things, but it's easier for me to respond to what was visually going on. I liked what was going on musically because it was so different, but I don't know how to describe it appropriately here. So visually, what's going on? I'm like, okay. I did see some pictures of this show, like just some production stills. It's hard not to see at least advertisements. So I knew what the show kind of looked like just based on a couple images. I'm like, okay, it's these are Greek myths, but we're not in ancient Greece. They are not telling the story and trying to be true to its roots. In terms of the look, I was like, what is this? It's Greek mythology by way of the grapes of wrath. But then we went and saw the show, and I'm like, oh, it feels like we're in New Orleans. I can't believe I was able to actually pinpoint the place. I don't know if that is exactly what they were going for, but I have read what other people have said, and they all say New Orleans. I'm like, yeah, it's like a 1930s New Orleans speakeasy kind of place. I love what's going on visually inside this show. Lighting designer really responded to the lighting. I mean, wow, the lighting does so much, and it's so simple. It's not like it has all these bells and whistles. It does what every lighting designer hopes they get to do with the show. It gets to be abstract and atmospheric and expressive. It doesn't steal the show, but it definitely elevates. So that's all good. And so the costumes, that's what I responded to when I accidentally saw some production stills. I was like, oh, okay, they look like they work in a coal mine, or there's a lot of symbolism in this with like trains, and they use train whistles, and there's a train track, and they're building a train or they're riding a train. Something trains are a theme, and I'm like, oh, like railroad workers, like I've been working on the railroad. That's what I think when I look at their costumes. So very interesting. Anyway, love the visuals of the show. And I did love how it sounded. It was just so different. And the only thing about the songs is the first time going through it, there was no real earworm kind of song initially for me. But I think I was just too busy trying to take in everything that was happening. I have bought the cast original Broadway cast recording, and the more I listen to it, the more I'm like, okay, now I'm starting to get hooked on certain motifs and stuff. So the ability to get all sucked into certain songs the way you would with a lot of musicals is certainly there. The potential is there. Let's talk about the performances, shall we? All right, have my handy dandy cheat sheet here so I don't say the wrong thing. Okay, we have a nice little cast. So the overall show does have a narrator. It's Hermes, who in this production is being played by Nathan Lee Graham. Very flamboyant, very like he totally had control of the audience. He paused a lot, and so we were with him. We are like, okay, we're gonna be quiet until you want to move forward. So he introduces us to uh, we have three women who play the Fates. I'm not completely sure what role they're supposed to serve other than because they're not narrating, he's narrating. So he he claims that they're like the voice in the back of your head. So I guess obviously they have something to do with the outcome of your life. In this exact production, they're being played by Dominique Kempf, Belen Moyano, and Nyla Watson. Okay, then we have our two couples, our four main leads, and even during the curtain call, they all kind of came out and bowed. They still did it one at a time, but they came out together. So I guess they're supposed to be like equally considered the leads. So Persephone was played by Maria Cristina Olivares. Very, very good, very soulful. Hades. Oh, I think Hades was like my favorite. Well, I don't know. I liked a few people. I loved Hades though. In this production, he was played by Matthew Patrick Quinn. So yeah, Hades and Persephone are like the couple that's been married for centuries. They represent the old timers. And so our young, newly in love couple, Orpheus being played by J. Antonio Rodriguez, and Eurydice being played by Hannah Whitley. All very strong, very good vocals. I don't even know what to call her. Composer, lyricist, uh, writer of the whole show, basically. She did say that she liked the idea of using both couples because she wanted everyone to be able to relate to somebody. So hopefully younger couples see themselves in Orpheus and Eurydice, and older couples would see themselves in Hades and Persephone. I can see that. One complaint I have about this show is, and it's not really its fault, like Greek myths are hard to emotionally get involved with. Um, this is a sung through musical, and they jump right into the action. There's very little setup except for the very opening number. It's like Hermes comes out and says, right, this, and this. Here are the players, and things happen. Instead of things just happening, like we spend some real time watching it happen. It's like we're told things. So I felt very distant. Like I didn't get emotionally wrapped up in these characters, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I just can tell you that for me, that didn't happen. Um, Music's beautiful and moving and epic. Um, but I didn't find myself getting emotionally involved. So that's one thing. Uh, Maybe it doesn't help that I already know the story. And they even open with that. This is another one of those shows like Sweeney Todd or Hamilton. A lot of musicals do this where the opening number is like, we're going to tell you kind of everything about this, and then we're going to play it out for you, right? This, you want to talk about a story as old as time, or even a story convention uh, of narrating as old as time. Like Romeo and Juliet do this. They're like, hey, here are these two young lovers. They die. Let's tell you the tale of how they got to death, right? This is kind of the same. So knowing it, I think, does alter how you see it. But it's funny that that's a major point in this show. They're like, they sing, it's a sad song, it's an old song, but we're going to tell it anyway because we hope that retelling it will make it somehow better. Like maybe this time they'll make it. I mean, who hasn't put in Titanic and go, maybe this time the ship won't hit the iceberg? You know it's going to happen because it did happen. But why do we feel compelled to watch that movie over and over again? Or at least some of us. Or something like maybe it's not Titanic, but you have something that is just like this where you're like, I know the outcome, but I can't help but look at it. So you're invested in the stakes of the situation. I just don't know how invested I am in these characters based on what was presented to me. And part of that kind of dovetails into the other criticism I have where The pacing of the show is odd. I applaud that it's not your typical Broadway show, except that they would pause in places and you weren't sure if the song was over. And so people started to like, you would hear like one little clap, and then people are like, oh, no one else is clapping. And then other times the song would end and it took like the lights going out or for them to stand there and really hold it differently for people to go, oh, okay, now they're done. um to their credit, I actually think it's a good tactic because I've never heard an audience so quiet. I mean, the audience was silent. You could hear a pin drop. I've never actually experienced that before. There's always shuffling, there's always people whispering. You know, people have bad attention spans, so it's hard for people to sit still. But I think because you didn't know where the bus was heading, because it wasn't following your typical musical theater conventions in terms of this is how we're going to tell a story, you didn't know what they were going to do when. And if you didn't listen carefully, you could get lost. So it was just better to be real still and just really like lean in and listen. I actually think it's a good approach. It actually feels really intimate, more like a play. So, like I said, it's currently playing on Broadway right now. It's at the Walter Kerr Theater, and I know this theater to an extent, not because I visited there, but just because I know I've studied the theaters themselves for a project I was doing. And you know, a bucket list item is to visit every theater if I can. And I was shocked that a musical was playing there. I'm like, really? That's more of a playhouse. I think it only has 900 seats or so. It's less than 1,000. And I always picture musicals needing more than that, but that's not true. There's plenty of intimate musicals, and this is another one. So maybe it's because even though they don't speak a whole lot, it's definitely a sung through musical, like the 1980s, you know, mega musical style. It's so quiet, you know. Uh, so it really makes you listen. So you do. So there's that. All right. So if you don't know the story of Hades and Persephone, they open with just telling you their story, and I got worried. I was like, oh, I thought we were going to see these two stories kind of happen in parallel and kind of be like Into the Woods, where what if when Little Red Riding Hood runs into the forest, she runs into Jack from Jack the Beanstalk, and because they ran into each other, they influence each other's stories, and that's why their stories turned out the way they do. I thought this was going to do that, but it's not. Hades and Persephone are well established in this, and they go, let's go back in time and tell the tale of them. So depending on who tells you the story, it changes a little bit. The basic concept is Persephone uh, is she's a goddess or she's the daughter of a goddess. I think it just depends on who's telling you the story. The idea is she's this beautiful girl who brings the spring, and she's um, just out enjoying her life, enjoying nature. And Hades sees her and falls in love with her, and he kidnaps her and he takes her to his underworld. And so the world is sad without her. Like the version I heard, it's her mom, who's the goddess of like the harvest or something, who's sad. And so because she's depressed, she makes the harvest disappear. And that's why we have seasons. Because through some trickery and stuff and some negotiating, Hades allows Persephone to leave the underworld for 6 months out of the year. So when she comes back, spring comes with her. And then we have summer. And then when she has to go back, that's autumn that goes into winter. So it was the Greeks' way of explaining how seasons happen. And they even say that in the show. They're like, this is where the seasons come from. They sing that whole tale. So in this show, that happened a long time ago, so long that they actually forget their love for each other. Because even though he kidnaps her, she does grow to love him. But it's not really their story. They just have to be present because they are important to the A story, which is Orpheus and Eurydice. So Orpheus is a son of a muse and possibly a god, I think. His distinguished quality is he has like the most beautiful voice ever. His voice is so beautiful that he can hypnotize people with his song and bewitch them and really make them feel things, like make them cry, like, oh my god, my emotions could crush mountains, kind of kind of thing. And he, a similar, this is where there is a parallel. He's just walking along and he uh, comes across Eurydice and falls in love with her. They fall in love, they get married, but it's short lived because in the original story, she just dies a tragic death soon after their marriage, and she's still young and stuff. And Orpheus is so overcome with grief that he goes to the underworld and begs, Lord Hades to release her, and he sings a beautiful song that moves all of the underworld. That like all the creatures that live down there um, are affected by this. And Hades agrees to let her go, but there's a twist. There's a condition, as with all these stories. So he gives them this test, and if they can pass it, Eurydice is allowed to come back to the world of living. Hopefully, you know this story. Hopefully, I'm not spoiling this myth for you. I'm not telling it very well, but the condition is he has to walk in front of her all the way back, walk all the way back from the underworld to the world of living. It's a long road. Eurydice has to walk behind him, and he's not allowed to turn and look at her. He has to wait until he's all the way back, actually back in the world of the living, and then he's allowed to uh, turn and look at her, because then they're free to just be together for the rest of their natural life. Just like with Pandora and her box and how that's a parable about curiosity, this is supposed to be a story about doubt. And they do have a song in the show called Doubt, and the doubt comes in, or and then doubt comes in, something like that. Well, he fails this test. He's walking along, walking along, walking. It's a very long walk. So a man left alone with his thoughts is not a good thing. It gives him time to doubt if this is true. He's like, well, why would Hades do this for me? How do I know he's not just trying to convince me to leave? So he does turn to see that she's there, but he fails the test. And so she's banished back into the underworld, and he's left back in the world living without her, and he can't come back. What's funny about the turn, the big moment, the big twist, it's not a twist if you know Greek mythology though, since I was so stuck on this whole we're in New Orleans and it's like the 1930s, I couldn't help but think about Disney's The Princess and the Frog. And I'm like, oh God, we need like a crossover event, like just I could hear Tiana saying, and they were almost there. Orpheus, you were almost there. You just had steps to go and you were almost there. Hadestown and Disney's The Princess and the Frog. Crossover event. Make it happen. Now, the story doesn't explain what happens afterward, but there have been myths that explain this happened to him. He just like withered away in his sorrow, or something came along and ripped him to shreds. Da, da, da. Like the exact thing doesn't matter. It's not important to this story. So I was riveted, even though when we got to the section where it's like, okay, you can go and you have to walk and don't turn and look. I knew it was going to happen. I was just curious to see how they were going to stage this in a compelling way. And it is a tenseful moment. If you know the myth, like I think a lot of us do, you're like, how are they going to do it? How are you going to do it? And it's so simple and effective. I could describe it, but it would be lame. You should just, if you haven't seen the show, just go see it. See how they do it. Now my husband went with me and he did not know this myth. So he was very confused. He's like, oh, I thought they were going to make it. I'm like, no, I didn't tell you much, but I did tell you that this was a sad show. And they even open with it. They're like, this is a sad story. It's hauntingly beautiful. It is very sad. And so you're like, okay, well, what's the point of this? And how do you take this tiny little myth and stretch it into like a 2.5 hour show? The show is long. And not a whole lot happens. It's a lot of just, we're going to sing a song and then we're going to sing another song. Because one formation of this show was it was a concert album first. It wasn't really it was a stage show in its early days, but then she repackaged it to be a concert album. It's never completely left that concept, but while it was a concert album, it grew this like underworld cult following. So apparently, for years and years, there's been all these Hadestown fans. I did not know that this show had this long a life. I knew it opened in like 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. So in my mind, I was like, oh, this is a fairly new show. Well, yeah, new to the masses, but not really new in the world. It's a bit long, and because we skip over the Hades Persephone, like where do they come from part, it really is just the Orpheus Eurydice part, which is fine. But there's not a whole lot going on. But it's very abstract and it's all like metaphor. And everything is mixed so eclectically, but you don't care. I mean, I think if you're open to different cues, you don't care. I don't care. I'm like, sure, yeah, Greek myths meets the great grapes of wrath in a New Orleans 1930s speakeasy. Sure. And it's folk music mixed with blues, mixed with, I'm sure, some other genres. I'm just not an expert on such things. So there's that. Uh, Visually stunning. It's just so different. So different from anything that I have seen. Even though there are things about it that it reminds me of, like I said, the opening song reminds me of other musicals that do the whole we're going to tell you what the story is and then show you. And it has some staging things that it not borrows, but I just saw Come From Away a few months ago. I'm like, oh wow, it's funny how a lot of the staging reminds me of Come From Away. Right down to there's just a couple chairs and tables that they just shuffle around, and not a whole lot of costume changes. That's also, it's not that Come From Away did that first. It's just I saw these two shows fairly close together, and I'm like, oh, look at the parallels. Um, and I'm not trying to say it's derivative. It's not that. I'm just saying this era of musicals is starting to show what it looks like, what people are doing to keep the industry fresh, right? There's nothing like Hadestown. This is very unique and lovely, beautiful, sad, uh, really well thought out, abstract, and it's not. I want to say it's cerebral, but not in the you have to do this deep thinking. I think it's all very intuitive. The masses can connect and go, okay, I get this. It's simplified enough so that you don't have to be a scholar to go, I get what's going on. If you are a scholar, you just get some extra treats, but you don't have to be one to get it. You know, you can take away whatever you want. Like, is this a metaphor for industrialism? Is it about the environment, the working class? You know, there's a lot of things that you could take away if you choose to see it, or you can bypass all that and just go like I'm just going for the love story and what it means to be human, how your choices do have consequences. Oh, I meant to talk about this with the story. What they really do differently in telling this story is um, Eurydice doesn't just die. The major change in this show is instead of just dying and then her fate is left up to Orpheus, because I never liked this Greek myth because I would read it and go, well, of course he looked. You know, you make the man in charge and you give him this one direction and he can't freaking do it. That, you know, married couples are going to relate to this story going, of course. She's not just a helpless victim that doesn't have any agency in the outcome of what happens to her. In this version, she is like the not the sweet, innocent, naive character. Actually, Orpheus is the one because he's all hopeful and he has the famous line that they use in all the advertisement of like, I want to see the world as it could be, not how it is. So he's hopeful and he's convinced that his poetry is going to make the world a better place. And she's more realistic. She's like, well, I've lived a while and poverty is real and it's important to stay warm and to stay fed and, you know, the basic human needs. And she's tired of being a starving working class person. So she goes through the underworld of her own volition. She doesn't know what she's signing up for, but it is her choice. So yes, it is Orpheus's fault that she's trapped there indefinitely, but she goes there first. So they both make bad choices. I think that's good because then it's not like, oh, it's all on him. It's this is all his fault. Uh, what I don't like about this change is Hades appears to her and he makes a deal. He's like, hey, are you tired of being hungry? Do you want protection and, assurance that you have security? Come with me. uh, and I don't like that just because I hate that Americans are lazy with their Greek mythology and they think Hades is the synonym for hell, and that means it's a dark, awful, burning inferno. And that's not what the underworld was to the ancient Greeks. It was just where the dead go. Kind of like how when we die, we go to heaven. That's just where dead people go. In their version, they go to a place, they go to the underworld. And Hades is just in charge of them. He's more of a steward. Whereas modern retellings of adaptations of this character kind of depict him like he's the devil. And I'm so tired of the devil appears in front of someone who's stupid and goes, just sign your name here and I'll give you what you want, but then your soul belongs to me. So he does that. He actually gives Eurydice a contract and she signs it and she doesn't really know what she's signing. And so now she belongs to him. I don't care for the whole, oh yeah, let's just be lazy and make him like the devil, because that's a shorthand that audiences can follow. I don't care for that. So dialogue wise, Hades and Persephone are having a fight, and she hates living in the underworld. Like she does love him, but she misses the world about it. She likes the sun and the flowers and all that good stuff. And he actually says to her, "Oh, you don't like this gilded cage I've made you? Well, I'll find someone who will." And Act One ends with him going to Eurydice and saying, "Hey, come with me." So you think at the end of Act One, oh, he's going to replace Persephone with Eurydice. That's what they're changing. But then Act Two opens, and Eurydice is just one of his minions working on the railroad because they're building his industrial town. Um, so I don't know why he has that line where he says to Persephone, I'll find someone else who will enjoy my embrace." He doesn't replace Persephone with Eurydice. He even says, "I don't care about this girl." So I don't understand why he appears to her at all. Like, what does his fight with Persephone have anything to do with Eurydice? The musical wants you to think it's connected, but when you actually look at the lyrics, you're like, that doesn't make sense. Eurydice does not become his new lover, his new queen. That's not what happens. But they use dialogue to make you think that's what's going to happen. I would just change those lines so he's like, well, fine. Who needs you? I love my new town that I'm building, and I'm going to continue to find workers to make it for me. So yeah, there's something a little fuzzy about the deal. I would just clean that up some more. This poor show, it's been workshopped to death, like to absolute death. You don't want any kind of work to stay in production hell forever. Yeah, see what I did there. But I do think it could use a little bit more tweaking. But this is me splitting hairs. You could totally ignore that and not care because again, it's visually stunning and the orchestrations are just so strong because they're so different, they're so innovative. You could forgive that. But if I were to say, well, what rubs me the wrong way, that would be the big one. But otherwise, yes, highly recommended. It's on tour right now for quite a while. It's still playing on Broadway. Go see it if you can. That I recommend it. And that's it for this one. I'll be back later with more. I got a few more shows coming up, so you'll see me again soon.